There was once a level nobody thought could be beaten. Esteemed is one of the hardest challenges available for players, with anybody being allowed to attempt it. It went on to be the longest reigning top 1 in the history of Geometry Dash. The story of Tartarus is filled with many twists and turns. Riot's big verification project that took the #1 spot from the previous cheated levels was Bloodbath. It's a fact anybody who's played the game for more than 5 minutes knows. It was the level that showed it was possible for players to reach for the stars. That all is true, but it was not the first attempted verification project for Riot. There's another level started before it that ended up being scrapped in favor of Bloodbath. That level is Silent Akbar. The level would have been ridiculous for 2014, and that's most likely why they didn't go ahead with it back then. It would have been too much for even Riot. Although it didn't get chosen to fill the gap above Cataclysm and Ice Carving Diablo X, the level wouldn't end up being entirely forgotten as time passed. On January 26th of 2018, a certain level would end up being back in a completely revamped state. The parts that didn't age well were replaced, and with a renaming to Tartarus, Silent Akbar was ready to shine. Tartarus was miles harder than the contemporary top levels and was openly released with cheats as a challenge for anybody in the community to verify. It was to be something just out of reach for players to strive to accomplish someday. The prize for winning was a shoutout from none other than Riot. With Tartarus up on the servers, it was now up to the players to give it their best shot. The first to make any notable progress was the veteran player Combi with a run of 25%, which made him the first person to reach the drop. 1/4 of the level had been done, but there was still a long way to go. Many wouldn't even attempt it due to the aura of unbeatability the level had surrounding it. It was constantly listed as one of the hardest upcoming levels in the game, alongside the likes of Unnerfed Innards and Orochi. It would end up lying dormant for a while as a result of this. If Tartarus was to be verified, it would take a passionate, ambitious player who fully believed they could do it. Just when all hope seemed lost, someone who fit those traits would enter the picture, and his name was Mully. Mully announced his intent to verify Tartarus with a run of 32%. This already was a good start, but he was not done here. It was time to grind the level and try to prove to the community it was feasible to beat. Mully had made substantial progress. Overcoming Tartarus wasn't just a dream anymore, and it seemed to be inching closer and closer to reality. If Mully pulled this off, he'd set a new era of difficulty and be remembered as one of the best players of his time. When he achieved 35 to 100 and 21 to 100, faith in him as the verifier continued to grow. His momentum looked completely unstoppable, but something was about to happen that would change the race completely.
No! No! No!
Mully died at the very end of the level. To say it was shocking was an understatement. Many community figures were sad to see the fail. If he'd been able to time a few more clicks, the level would have been done and over then and there. Following on from this, he'd end up taking a break from Tartarus, which would open a gap for other competitors to come into the race. Metaman Z and Dolphy would start progressing, with Metaman Z getting 53% and Dolphy getting 55%. While Metaman Z would fizzle out of contention, Dolphy would end up sticking around and really giving Mully a run for his money. He'd go on to achieve bests of 78% and 91% and then get 23 to 100. The race was getting down to the wire, and either competitor could pull ahead to be the verifier. On December 30th, 2019, Dolphy was presented with a chance to be the one to do it. Would he make it to the finish line or choke just like Mully?
Что? 98!
With both of the people in the race reaching the end, the stakes grew higher. Who was going to close out the level almost 2 years on from its release? People from all across the community were waiting to see what would happen next. On January 6, 2020, you would finally have an answer.
Да! Я прошел! Я прошел! Я прошел Tartaus!
Dolphy did it. He verified Tartarus, but not everyone was quick to celebrate his achievement. Allegations that he'd cheated began swirling around the community, and people were quite divided on their stance towards it. N-Level would release an exposing video that had him seemingly being able to continue playing with a pop-up over the level like nothing happened. With a case this high profile, the Demon List would end up having to get involved and run their own investigation into Dolphy's legitimacy. But while that was still ongoing, something else would shake up the entire Tartarus situation.
Oh my god!
Mully would end up pulling through with Tartarus. Because there was no concerns over Mully's legitimacy, his copy would end up being raided and he was viewed as the verifier. It would end up being placed at the #1 spot, ending Zodiac's nearly year-long run as the #1 demon. Meanwhile, the Dolphy investigation was still ongoing, with people proposing counters to the initial exposed video, and Dolphy doing private proof streams for the Demon List moderators. Eventually, with more evidence in favor of Dolphy, he was viewed as a legit player. This would also make him the true verifier of the level. Mully was a very good sport about it, going out of his way to have his copy unrated and handing the rate to Dolphy. With Tartarus firmly placed as the #1 demon, there was now a target on its back for players to try to dethrone it. The first to try was the game's #1 player at the time, Nswish. They had just received a verification project from the best challenge player, Bo, called the Golden. With the best player in the world at the helm, surely it would be able to push Tartarus out of the top spot. When it got verified, initial opinions led to it being placed at the #1 spot, but over time as players completed both of the levels, this would change, and Tartarus would be put back on top. It would end up taking a year for any other serious challenges for the #1 spot to come out, but when they did, it was a huge wave of them. First came Sonic Wave Infinity, which would end up at the #3 spot. Then came Hard Machine, which ended up lower in the top 10 due to Space UK's opinion, which we now know was illegitimate. Afterwards, Arcturus seemed poised to take the throne, but would end up being left unrated and not able to place at all. Was Tartarus just going to keep the #1 spot forever? Eventually, levels that were undeniably harder would come though. In October of 2021, both Slaughterhouse and Firework were verified. Both of them seemed monstrously difficult even compared to Tartarus, and when they got rated, both were quickly placed above, knocking it down to #3 on the list. It took almost 2 full years for players to be able to push past Tartarus and onto the next chapter. To this day, it is still the longest reigning top 1 the game has ever seen. From verifying it to surpassing it, Tartarus was always a huge benchmark that showed the community that anything is possible with dedication and hard work. But the story doesn't end here. A spiritual successor to it in Acara would end up being created and go on to be the #1 demon itself, bringing the 1.9 style of Tartarus into the modern era of the game. When Acara eventually fell to Tidal Wave, a third level in the same style, Eternus, would end up being created to fill the role Tartarus once had as a far-off goal for the community to strive for. Nobody has made much of any progress on it yet, but if history has told us anything, it's that someone will eventually show up and prove it possible.